I spent a lot of time testing graphics cards, and just in the last couple of months, both AMD and Nvidia updated their upscaling tech, specifically to boost image quality, just in time for the holidays and CES 2026 in Las Vegas. I wasn't able to find this time to sit down with either FSR Redstone or DLSS 4.5 when they first came out, but why not take a look now? And I will admit that I've been a believer in GPU-based upscaling ever since DLSS first graced the RTX 2080 Ti all the way back in 2018. Even back then, AAA games were getting extremely hard to run at 4K, and the performance situation has become even more dire since then. We're now at a point where upscaling, whether through DLSS, FSR, XeSS, or some other arcane solution, is supported in pretty much every major game release. And now I turn it on without even thinking about it. But it's been years since I took the time to sit down with both FSR and DLSS at the same time to see how they compare. And, well, they both improved substantially over the last few years when it comes to image quality, even if Nvidia still holds a clear edge with DLSS 4.5. Back when I got into PC gaming, there was always one or two games that were so demanding that no reasonable gaming PC was able to run them. Think things like Crysis or Metro 2033 when that first came out. Those were games that we collectively just accepted were built for future hardware, and I personally always look forward to upgrading my rig just to see how much better that type of game would run. These days though, it feels like every major game is built for future hardware. If you take upscaling out of the equation, there are a ton of games that are incredibly hard to run at higher resolutions. PC games like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Cyberpunk 2077, and Assassin's Creed Shadows are all extremely heavy on your graphics card, especially at 4K. And while this would suck for anyone trying to get into PC gaming, upscaling makes these games pretty accessible as long as you have new enough hardware to support DLSS or FSR. Through these software solutions, you can use special hardware in your graphics card to upscale to your native resolution from a lower resolution, and without the kinds of artifacts and aliasing you'd usually get when you do that. That sounds lame, right? I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that long for playing games at a true 4K, and that's perfectly understandable. But at least for me, what really matters is whether or not the game looks good enough, while also having performance that doesn't make me want to tear my hair out. It does help that the latest versions of both DLSS and FSR offer big improvements in image quality over their predecessors, even if they don't offer quite as much of a performance improvement as their previous models. DLSS 4.5, for instance, introduces a new iteration of its transformer model that can more accurately upscale from much lower resolutions. This is particularly noticeable when DLSS is set to performance or ultra performance, where the model is inferring up to 75% of the image. As I'll get into later, this does pay off with better image quality, particularly in Assassin's Creed Shadows, but you do lose a few frames in the process. Luckily, you can always switch back to the old model via the Nvidia app. Likewise, FSR 4, AMD's latest upscaling tech, is its first iteration that uses the AI accelerators in RDNA 4 graphics cards. Because any kind of AI workload is heavy, it is a bit heavier than FSR 3. However, it is much more accurate when upscaling, which also leads to better image quality. Unlike Nvidia's tech though, FSR 4 is AMD's first go at an AI upscaling solution, so there are some kinks that Team Red still needs to work out, especially when it comes to micro-tearing. Right now, DLSS 4.5 and FSR 4 are opt-in, meaning you have to manually enable them in the Nvidia app and AMD Adrenalin respectively. For DLSS 4.5, open the Nvidia app, go to Graphics, then Global Settings. Scroll down to DLSS Override Model Presets and set it to Recommended. Or you can go game by game and go to Custom, and under the Super Resolution dropdown, set it to Preset M for DLSS Performance Mode, or Preset L for Ultra Performance Mode. However, keep in mind that this does have larger performance costs on older RTX graphics cards. For FSR 4, open the AMD Adrenalin app, go to the Gaming tab. From there, navigate to the Graphics tab, and scroll down to AMD FSR Upscaling. This should be enabled by default right now, but if it isn't, turn it on. You can also turn on AMD FSR frame generation if you want better frame generation as well. There are certainly some points where even DLSS 4.5 and FSR 4 look a little worse than native resolution, but that's worth it for the performance gains you can get from it. For instance, in Cyberpunk 2077, the RTX 5080 gets 30 FPS at 4K with the Ray Tracing Ultra preset. Turn DLSS 4 to performance and the number immediately goes up to 71 FPS or 67 FPS with DLSS 4.5. Likewise, the Radeon RX 9070 XT with the same settings gets 22 FPS without FSR, and 60 FPS once FSR is set to performance, and that's before you turn on frame generation. In Assassin's Creed Shadows, as well, both FSR and DLSS give a huge boost in performance. For the 9070 XT, Assassin's Creed Shadows goes from 31 FPS at a needed 4K resolution to 53 FPS when upscaled from 1080p. Then, FSR FrameGen brings that number up to 94 FPS, though with some added latency. The 5080 is very similar. At native 4K, the RTX 5080 gets 36 FPS, and then goes up to 58 FPS with the DLSS 4 or 53 FPS with DLSS 4.5, with the latter going up to 95 FPS when frame generation is enabled. Even ignoring the divisive frame generation, the performance jumps alone are enough to convince me to enable FSR DLSS in pretty much any game I play, especially at 4K. Extra frames from frame generation for either Nvidia or AMD are just icing on top, especially if you're not super sensitive to the added latency. It is still surprising that RTX 5080 and Radeon RX 9070 XT are so close when it comes to performance, but the gap does widen when you look at the actual image quality. Anytime you're taking a lower resolution image and upscaling to a higher resolution, there's going to be some loss of quality. That's the whole point of these technologies after all, mitigating the loss of image quality while gaming at a lower resolution. But while they're both typically excellent at improving performance, Nvidia has a clear lead when it comes to image quality. To test this, I really wanted to stress the algorithms. I focused on samples with frame generation set at 2x and upscaling set to the performance preset, which upscales to 4K from 1080p. That way you can really see the differences in the algorithm. The most obviously differences are in Assassin's Creed Shadows. Even though this game runs extremely well on AMD hardware, the image quality is just not the same between FSR and DLSS. Just take a look at this sample. We're just sitting AFK in a hideaway. You can see some blurring in the branches above Yasuke's head, but the clearest difference is closer to the ground. If you zoom in on the bush here, you can almost see like a fuzzy halo effect around it on the DLSS 4 sample, but it's even more pronounced with FSR. Swap to the new DLSS 4.5 though, and it's incredibly crisp. You can also see some loss in detail in Yasuke's armor, especially on the helmet. Specifically, look at the yellow studs around the helmet. FSR loses some definition here, where DLSS just doesn't. The image softness extends to the benchmark too. I paused the run when it got to the point of Naue and Yasuke drinking tea together. You can see some fuzziness around Naue's hair. Then, if you zoom in behind her, you can see the wood paneling loses some of its texture. It's important to note though, that most of this isn't going to be noticeable until you pause the game and zoom in, which most people simply won't do. But when I get to Cyberpunk, the gaps between the technologies gets, well, weirder. Going through the benchmark in slow motion, I started to see these little micro tears pop up when using FSR 4. If you zoom on the bartender here, you can see that he basically gets cut in two pieces by a tear on the AMD card, and both DLSS and DLSS 4.5 are free from this error. I even switched off frame generation and noticed that this behavior continued, which means it's an issue with the upscaling algorithm and not with the frame generation. This issue also repeats here, where you can zoom in on this slowly moving fan and see more micro tears popping up for the AMD card. However, you can see that some micro tears appear while using DLSS 4 as well. Luckily, DLSS 4.5 appears free of this problem. But speaking of frame generation in Cyberpunk, it does have problems, especially in faster moving scenes. If you zoom in on this car driving along the highway, you can see that these little sparkles appearing in the road. Curiously, however, it's the older DLSS 4 that's free of this error, with it being present on both DLSS 4.5 and FSR 4. It took me 20 minutes of watching these clips to find this though, so it's not a major issue either way. One of the best parts of any Monster Hunter game is the meal scenes, and it's annoying that the microtear issue reappears for FSR here. After the meat is cooked, I zoomed in on the knife, and you can see a big microtear split the knife in two. Then, zooming in and playing the scene in slow motion, you can see little microtears pop up all over the place on the AMD card. Both versions of AMD's upscaling are free of this issue. What's weirder though is how FSR acts with the spinning cog wheel right by the armorer. I noticed it while walking around the town, but didn't register what exactly the problem was. But when you zoom in and slow it down, you can see that in the DLSS sample, all the teeth on the wheel take up the entire width as it's spinning. On the FSR sample though, the algorithm essentially hallucinates that some of the teeth are shorter than others. I'm no engineer, but I'm pretty sure that would cause some kind of problem. Look, ever since FSR came out, there's been a gap in image quality between it and DLSS. And while that gap is still there, I did have to zoom in and slow down footage to notice it most of the time. For most people, the performance games with either algorithm are good enough to warrant turning it on. But if you really are after the best possible image quality, DLSS 4.5 is still the way to go, even if it does lose a bit of performance uplift compared to DLSS 4.0.